Thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good morning, everyone. We will slowly start this session. I would like to invite our parents, Julie, also to the front seat. He's in the back. Julia, would you like to sit here? Please, thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session on the Sufficiency Revolution, ensuring a just transition through Indigenous wisdom, resilience, and human rights. We're expected to have a very insightful and exciting session, hopefully, where we will hear from a range of speakers that will share their views and experiences around this particular topic. But before introducing the speakers, I wanted to touch on what sufficiency is, which is something I reference quite a lot also in my book, The RBA Climate Guide, that I wrote last year. In the buildings and construction industry, we often talk about resource efficiency. And resource efficiency really stems from utilizing available natural resources within the planetary limits to support human needs. The protection of all the resources is the basis of our prosperity, and it relies on minimizing resource consumption, which is where the efficiency is attained, using renewable and or recycled alternatives, which is where consistency comes into picture, and limiting the absolute use of available resources, which is about sufficiency. And that's the focus of our conversation today. And doing all of this while also carefully considering how they are fairly and equitably distributed both within and in between countries. So that's the essence of sort of resource efficiency, consistency, and sufficiency that I would like to contextualize in our conversation today. Because also this is the only way we can adopt the wider sort of value system approach that goes beyond economic framings, decoupling financial growth from environmental degradation and promoting the long-term health of the planet and its people. According to the IPCC report on climate mitigation, decarbonization of buildings and the broader economy is only attainable if we rely on sufficiency policies, which they describe around a set of measures aimed at reducing the demand of resources such as energy use and materials. Following this sort of very brief scene setting that I provided you, I would like to soon invite Giulio Ferrini from the Institute for Human Rights and Business to dive deeper into this topic by contextualizing it around where we are today. But before inviting Giulio to the stage, after Giulio, I also want to give you a bit of a structure of how today's event is going to run. So after we hear insights from Giulio, then I will briefly share the new Global ABC report being launched today on sufficiency and the built environment, which hopefully many of you will hear more about it throughout this today. And then Cédric Borel and Damien Tamizier from A4MT will share their views on this particular report. They will be joining us online to really talk about the details and the key takeaways from this report that is being launched today. Then we have Yves-Laurent Sapavoil, who is the Ministerial Delegate for Sustainable Cities, Urban Envoy for the French Ministry of Ecology and Housing, and a member of Climate Chance, along with Emna Bashir from the International Union of Architects, and Ilya Azarov, who is the Director at Large at the American Institute of Architects, who are sitting in the first row, will be joining us on stage to really react to these reports' key findings and the messages that they want to amplify. Finally, we will have a chance to hear from Gaetan Siev and Iman Gawad from the International Union of Architects, who have joined us also kindly today at this stage to talk about the role of architects and the importance of architecture practice in learning from the past, preserving the heritage, and promoting sustainable practices for a resilient future. I would now like to invite Giulio to join me up here on stage to really share his views. Giulio, please welcome. Thank you. Okay. So, if I could start by asking Giulio, your institute has recently completed a global research on a just transition in the built environment. What are some of the positive and negative case studies and examples that you have uncovered in this research, and how do you think we can ensure this transition that we're talking about is a just one?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you to Global ABC for hosting the event today, and thanks for all the wonderful panelists that we're going to hear from. I think the topic is hugely relevant And I think just to contextualize it a little bit, obviously, Global ABC published their global status report in March, and I think the findings were quite humbling and quite scary. I think clearly, the building sector still accounts for 21% of global greenhouse emissions, 37% of global CO2 emissions, and the direction of travel is not going in the right direction. We see improvements in energy efficiency, but actually the total energy emissions continues to rise, and the gap between the trajectory to net zero and the actual trajectory of the industry is widening. So I think we went from having to do kind of 6% increases in energy efficiency to 15% increases if we want to hit our 2030 targets, which obviously is a massive challenge. And I think to maybe understand how the just transition comes into it, we really have a kind of situation where we need to still build lots of housing, lots of real estate, particularly in certain parts of the world where the basic human rights are not being met, where lots of people are still living in informal housing. And we see this resulting in, every week an area equivalent to Paris being built in floor space around the world. And similarly, in many global north countries, we see this issue of sufficiency coming through. The vast majority of emissions are not associated with that new construction. They're associated with a quality and a lifestyle that is possibly beyond planetary boundaries. And we really don't see the improvements made in energy efficiency and reduction in energy consumption that we expect in the global north. And it's particularly frightening in the context of 2/3 of the world's finance being in real estate, but we really have not had success in mobilizing that finance towards retrofit and towards energy efficiency. A lot of that investment in the global north still does go into new buildings and in an increasing area of floor space per person, which really I think we do have to question, and I think the report from today will do that very well. So what we did in the last 2 years, thanks to amazing support from the Loudest Foundation and over our foundation, we embarked on a 2-year study looking at the intersection of human rights and climate action. And that's how we as an institute, we deal with human rights and business. That's how we interpreted a just transition. And I want to really stress that a just transition is obviously a topic that is gaining momentum and a lot of public interest, and there's many different interpretations of it. And we try to take the view that it would be up to local people to define what a just transition has been in their context. So we really only framed it around 4 key human rights. So we looked at the right to housing, the rights of construction workers, the right to meaningful participation, and social spatial equity across 8 global cities. So we commissioned independent research in Valparaiso in Chile, in Jakarta in Indonesia, in Lagos in Nigeria, in Melbourne, Australia, and then 4 European cities. So Lisbon, Copenhagen, Athens, and Prague. And the findings are really interesting. I think we see places where decarbonization initiatives are being leveraged to improve human rights, to uphold human rights, and to improve social equity. So, for example, we see programs in Indonesia, a green new housing initiative that is that has already delivered 100,000 affordable, sustainable homes for marginalized communities and is aiming to deliver 1 million by 2030. Similarly, we see opportunities for improved participation, and we see programs that are driven by EU capital funding to improve participation in places where historically communities have been marginalized or have not been part of the conversation around strengthening human rights. Some practical examples of this include the improved due diligence regulation in the EU, which is driving improved business practice. We're really seeing businesses that are taking a risk and trying to deliver more equitable, inclusive business models that look at delivering environmental outcomes, but also social outcomes. Particularly some case studies from Denmark. Home.earth is a really interesting organization that includes tenants on its governance mechanism. And in Belgium, an organization called Inclusio, a small business that is leveraging private capital to deliver sustainable homes for lots of previously unhoused individuals and recently arrived migrants. Unfortunately, we have also found lots of examples where decarbonization initiatives are not resulting in positive human rights outcomes. So a really frightening example is from the city of Lagos, where the city, even the term Lagos means lake, so obviously it's a city that floods very often, and they're projected to be underwater in the next 20 years. So the city had this big challenge of adaptation, and they decided to build a new coastal protection system. And to fund this, they decided to privatize a large part of the public beach and build a new neighborhood that would protect the rest of the city and also deliver much needed housing. But through this privatization mechanism, they've effectively delivered a new luxury gated community, and they've displaced 80,000 local people who were living on floats, who were living in informal contexts, and now have been displaced from this community, from this publicly owned, from this public beach, which has now become a privatized gated community. So we really see the risk of negative social outcomes from poorly informed or poorly planned climate action. And this isn't just in the global south. We see this happening in the global north as well. A big trend that we've seen very tragically is much of the Green Deal investment in Europe to renovate and improve homes not being accompanied by appropriate social safeguards. So we've seen places like Lisbon and places like Athens where lots of public funding has been given to private landlords to retrofit their homes. But it's very easy for a landlord to terminate a tenant's contract. So once the home has been improved using public money, they simply bump up the rent, and the tenants are displaced because they can no longer afford it. So they're moved to a new neighborhood. So we're obviously seeing the environmental efficiency gain, but who is gaining? Who is paying those lower bills? And it's likely to be people who are already more affluent and more privileged. So I think it's, the intention of the report, we're very mindful when we're publishing it that it is something that can easily be weaponized, and we're seeing lots of narratives weaponizing and suggesting that there is a tension between human rights or social impact and decarbonization, and we're seeing, with the Gilets Jaunes movement in France, with the protests against heat pumps in Germany, with the protests against gas boilers in the States, we're seeing lots of examples of maybe poorly planned initiatives that are affecting a marginalized community being weaponized at the global scale. And we obviously we don't need to fuel that fire. Like, I think we really have to be mindful as professionals, as policymakers, to ensure that we really think through the kind of equity implications of our decarbonization initiatives. And a real key message from the report is that we recognize that most countries, most systems currently are inequitable, and any change that you implement in an inequitable system, the cost and benefits are not going to fall equitably. They are likely going to be distributed along existing power imbalances. So the homeowners are likely to benefit more than the renters. Those who are in higher paid, secure jobs are likely to benefit more than those in precarious conditions, migrant workers. And so we have to take a deliberately equitable approach. We have to rebalance the scales. We talk about lifting the social foundation before we implement any kind of transformation, and that can be decarbonization, it can be whatever we want. But really, one of the key messages of the report is ensuring that before you pump a load of public money into retrofit, what are the safeguards for tenants? Before you go on a big reskilling transformation agenda, how welcome are unions in your country? How organized are workers? So a real key message is, the idea of lifting the social floor in order to accelerate and advance climate action, because otherwise you will face that pushback. It's not the only reason. Obviously, you should want to lift that social floor regardless, because it's the right thing, but we're really recognizing, I think we've always known that there is no way to ensure human rights without tackling the climate, but I think we're now recognizing that we can't tackle the climate without addressing human rights. And that's a real key finding of the report, and something that I hope we can all take forward.
Thank you, Giulio. I think those are amazing insights. And if I can just sort of summarize, you talked about the participation from marginalized communities, that you thought that it was a great, perhaps missed opportunity in many instances where we need to leverage greater and more moving forward. You talked about the social and spatial equalities and equities, and I specifically appreciate the word spatial equity that you mentioned, and also the negative social outcomes that derive from poorly informed initiatives and solutions that are being offered around the world. And if I can, maybe this is a takeaway question, and you're more than welcome to answer if you wanted to, but I wonder, often, especially during COPs, we talk a lot about how do we measure, how do we measure, how can data inform, give the insights that we need to be able to make better informed decisions moving forward. I think this is a question that many don't yet have full understanding of the how, but I'm going to ask you, and you're more than welcome to answer, or maybe this is a takeaway for everyone, is about how do we measure equity? How do we measure the social outcomes? Maybe it's an entire session that we can dedicate to this, but it would be great if you have sort of key tips and tricks or takeaways from your research that you can share with the audience today. That would be great.
I think it's a very good question. It's one that we tackle often, particularly when engaging with the business sector and with investors. I think there's a real hunger and appetite for the business case around social equity and around the S and ESG, call it whatever you like. And we do see lots of initiatives emerging in this space. I think we see organizations like the World Benchmarking Alliance, which published its Urban Impact Report last week, ranking the efforts of many global countries, including Holcim, who I think we're hearing from later today. But also we see an increasing movement around obviously the EU taxonomy, which is obviously an attempt at measuring the environmental aspect of sustainability. And I think the fact that the talks around the social taxonomy fell apart, I think points to the challenge in finding a kind of unanimously agreed framework for assessment. I think we're very mindful of having a kind of one-size-fits-all way of assessing social impact. One real takeaway from our global research project was that the definition of just transition is inherently local. What are the issues at stake in the local context? And I think we can try to standardize our approach. I'm not sure we should be trying to standardize the metrics. So I think what we advocate for at the Institute for Human Rights and Business is developing frameworks. And I think there's the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance have developed some. We have developed some, including our Dignity by Design framework, that looks at asking probing questions and engaging the community in designing their own framework for what is meaningful to them. What are the metrics that are of relevance in the local context? It doesn't make sense to have the same metrics in a place where, like Lagos, when 2/3 of people are in informal housing, and comparing that to places like Copenhagen. I think it's extremely unlikely that you will find the same metrics to assess that. Now, of course, we need to have a way when it's a global challenge to collectively decide priorities, and I think that's an effort for all of us collectively in the room, and for people in other rooms to look at the amount of capital that is being mobilized from certain countries into others to ensure that the transition is equitable. But I do think it's really, really important to remain grounded in the community and ask ourselves, when we're measuring something, who are we measuring it for, and is it making a difference to the people whose life we want to improve?
This is great. Thank you so much, Julia, for your time and for the insights that you've kindly shared. As mentioned before, there is a new report that is being launched today by the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction on Sufficiency and the Built Environment. And we have two of our esteemed speakers online, Cedric Borrell. Oh, sorry. Cedric Borrell is kindly joining us online to give us more insights on what this report covers. Hi, Cedric. Welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. Thank you, Mina. And thank you, Julia, for the insight.
Thank you joining us, Cedric. If you wouldn't mind, can you please share your general thoughts on and the insights as well as recommendations presented in this report that is being launched today on sufficiency and the built environment, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mina. I'm very happy to disclose the report on behalf of the Global ABC, thanks to the funding of ADEM International and made by IFEV and A4MT and numerous contributors I'm thanking. And I pay tribute to our former colleagues, Marine Jar and Hugo, which were key in animating the Sufficiency Action Group. Thank you for all the introduction. And the report stresses that despite the efforts of decarbonizing the sectors through energy efficiency measures, renewables, etc., progress has remained stagnant or too small. So the authors call or recalled us that there is a decarbonization ceiling where technical improvements do not necessarily lead to lower energy consumption or emissions, and instead they promote economic expansion and environmental externalities, like Julio reminded us. So this new concept, sufficiency, is coming on the table. It came by the IPCC report. So the question we have to ask ourselves was how to translate it to the built environment. You defined sufficiency set of measures aimed at avoiding the demand for resources while delivering well-being for all within planet boundaries. A simple definition, but how does it translate to the built environment? So we know there is psychological obstacles to adopting greater sufficiency, but many opportunities emerging both on human and technical sides. So as a specialist in building and construction, I will just develop how it relates to the built environment. So you can find also examples of sufficiency in some public policies, including France, which has integrated energy efficiency into a response in 2022-23, the energy crisis, or in the township canton of Geneva, which incorporates sufficiency and it's in its energy and climate plan to reduce overall demand rather than just focusing on energy efficiency of the buildings. So sufficiency works at all scales. To begin with, of course, the biggest driver of resource consumption in the built environment is the floor area growth. So the issue needs to be addressed by urban development planners. If we don't want to see all the decarbonization efforts offset by increase of the floor area. So we found that Medellin in Colombia, for instance, has high construction and housing densities and limited developable land for new quality projects. This issue requires optimizing and repurposing existing spaces and construction. Also, for this scale of urban planning, a zero net artificialization regulation was enforced in France to halve the artificialization rate by 2030, then curb to a net zero artificialization in 2050. So first, urban housing, land use is key for sufficiency. Do we have to build? This is a question that we should ask every time. And then when you come back to design, construction, and deconstruction stages, a lot in the hand of architects and designers, you have to question building needs, the building total floor area and the shape to reduce the need for material, question everything. The report says basically that you have to question everything, optimizing processes, and search for, of course, alternate structural material when it comes to carbon. On the contrary, you can design on low-tech and efficient techniques to not overuse, not waste materials. So a vibrant challenge for architects in the new world. And then when it comes to energy management and operations, we know that badly managed building can consume more than 100 and 200% of what should be the target of consumption and emissions. So the logic of the right kilowatt hour, the right place at the right time, is something very unusual in this world. So regulation system doesn't always deliver it because they are not installed or not well managed. Really, we just go through examples where good buildings are supposed to be good buildings. When they went through our contests, we got a yearly world contest on energy efficiency in building, but we saw very good building progressing more than 50 or 60% on their total consumption, minus 60% in 1 year, because they are taking back the management of the building and the operation and fine setting a sufficient use with all the users. So in all the value chain, it contributes to the building sector being on track. And of course, this is a mindset after all. So the recommendation of the report for public policies include trying not trying to include and integrate sufficiency into the NDCs, leading by example on the public buildings, limit the growth of floor space and land use, and minimize the overall demand for new floor space, and of course, reduce or avoid upfront demand for energy and water during both construction and operational phases. So Of course, in all countries, sufficiency measures should be contextualized and not seen as a blanket limitation on growth across all sectors and regions. Rather, policies should adopt a differentiated approach considering regional and economic specificities, as Giro recalled us. And of course, it's all about avoiding overconstruction. So the main phrase or the main what you should remind of this report that there is a sufficiency first principle. We advocate like the good old energy efficiency first principle of the EU. We are coming to a sufficiency first principle which can lead everything. So this is a key finding or maybe advocacy of this report, and you will find all the details online, of course. Then, so the Sufficiency Hub is going on thanks to a new funding by ADEM, and so this has been promoted from an action group to a Sufficiency Hub, and we will build momentum from now and the next year to explore all the core principles we've been finding and writing about. Of course, metrics, have you mentioned, Mina? And so the second season will focus on two main objectives. First is spreading the sufficiency first principle. Very important to think that there is some actions in some places, but we have to develop an interactive map of what are the global sufficiency policies existing around the world and projects, and create the communication between all people, so the sufficiency is well understood amongst policymakers and building practitioners. And we will try to provide tools for implementing sufficiencies. So we will collect from these public policies and make them a generic proposition for all the countries of the world. And of course, we will work on metrics with the group. So thank you very much, Mina. These are the very basic insight of the report. It is online on the Global ABC website.
Thank you very much, Cedric, for your sort of insightful details and observations that you shared kindly about this report. We're all very excited. I am very personally excited to read this report in detail. And I've sort of taken some of the key messages. You've highlighted some of the messages that are highlighted within the report, but I also want to just emphasize, perhaps help inform our conversation later today, that how progress remains stagnant across the sector, but with this new introduction of the sufficiency first principle, hopefully we have a new mindset, a new way of how we value and how we will utilize resources that are available at our disposal. So I'm very excited to apply this principle, this concept in all aspects of our work. And you talked about that it's applicable to every scale, including policies and regulatory sort of frameworks that we may be seeing emerging. So really excited to be working with this sort of new mindset, if I can say it that way. So thank you so much for joining us online again. And now I would like to invite Yves Laurent, Emna, and Elia to stage to really get their feedback and response and reactions to this new report that is being launched by the Global ABC today. May I have you on the stage, please? And you can circulate the microphones as you see it fit, but I'll start with Yves Laurent, if that's okay. Yves Laurent, so how do you see the findings of this report? Obviously, you have, as the sort of the chair of the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, you have insights to this report throughout its development. And how do you see the findings of this report really influencing the policies or regulations aimed at promoting sufficiency within the built environment?
How long? No, 3-4 things. Okay, so first, no choice. Overshoot day, no choice. I mean, so yeah. Ma main un petit peu plus haut. Ça? C'est mieux? Ok? Oui? Okay, so I begin from the start. First, no choice. Overshoot day. We are all, well, wasting more than what we can, and we are not paying for what we have. Second, let me see here. It's not simple. Needs, lots of needs, housing needs, equipment needs in the developing countries. People should have a choice to live in other places than slums. First element of complexity in some way, the needs. Second, evil is in details. It's not easy, even if you want to, it's not easy to do. It's worth, I mean, Cédric Borrell, well, he's not here anymore, but he says that 25% of the savings in buildings energy consumption can be made without any works in the building. It's just changing what you do. So, but then evil in the detail. Evil is in the details. It's not easy even for people who want to implement sufficiency policies to really implement it. I'll come back to it, but it's really a question. We had this question of, I mean, believe it or not, in France we've been regulating the size of the doors of the les terrasses de café, okay? Because you weren't supposed to heat the terrace outside. So what is inside, what is outside? This is another question for architects. I'll get back to it. And not simple because it has to happen at all scales. So this leads me to my third point, which is cleverness. We will need cleverness. It's not only a shift in value that we all need to, well, we'll come back to the shift, we'll come to a shift of value because reality at some point will come to, whether we want it or not, sufficiency is going to be. I mean, the question is sooner or later. The sooner the better, to my opinion, but sooner or later, sufficiency is going to be because we won't be continuing this trend. Okay. So cleverness, we need to invest in cleverness. Cleverness is bottom up because we will need solutions from the ground because at the end of the day, sufficiency comes from us. Us, all the people, let's say, in different situations, but sufficiency won't happen if everybody is not in. Top down, because this won't come without some political impulse, some constraints, some regulations and things like that. And I get to my last point, middle out, which is specifically the role of architects, because you need to imagine solutions. So you need to give money to those who imagine solutions, who make these solutions possible. Shifting from a world of everything new land, new materials, new buildings, to a world that is second-hand land, second-hand materials, second-hand buildings is not an easy thing. You need smartness, you need cleverness. Okay, and to finish with, by answering your question, it will need exchanges of solutions. It will need cooperation. It will need discussions to know who's doing what where, to see what solutions can be implemented in another place. And this is specifically the role of Global ABC. Moreover, the role of the ICBC, between governments. Well, Global ABC is the global thing with all the partners, you know that. And the ICBC is more the governmental thing that we are setting up tomorrow. We need cooperation between governments, because we need this to evaluate. We need to discuss new values. We need to discuss with the developing countries that they can leapfrog. They don't have to pass through our mistakes to get to better solutions. We've been making mistakes. It took us from our first regulation in France on energy efficiency in buildings, and it's not energy efficiency, well, let's say on buildings, our first regulation on buildings and climate, let's say, is 1972, and we are not yet there. So imagine if everybody takes this time. I mean, we're all dead. So not all solutions are going to be high-tech solutions. We need to develop, and I want to quote here the climate change report, déclaration de feuille de route de Yaoundé, which is also pointing this in terms of housing. So this is what we can do. We can deliver these messages. We can advocate for this. We can convince people that at the end of the day there is no choice, and we can give tools for exchanging between governments in order to go the right way. So that's all we can do. That's what we'll try to do.
Thank you so much, Yves Laurent. And especially in having worked in France and continue to work in France before in projects as an architect and engineer, I actually applaud France to a certain extent that it's leading the way in terms of regulatory sort of frameworks and initiatives to be able to help inform how this decarbonization process, perhaps faster than any other European country, at least, if I can just isolate, just for the sake of conversation.
Thank you for that. I just
Yeah.
thank you for that. It's not easy, and it's sufficiency, specifically sufficiency, is not easy, because the load is on everyone, and this load, nobody really wants to carry the load, and we get to just transition here. The main question of this transition is specifically that it is just, because the amount of things that we will collectively have to pay in terms of, not only in terms of money, but to pay. The amount, if it's not fairly distributed, it's not going to happen. So the question of just transition is really core here. And it's not easy in France, because this question of zero artificialisation net we are really struggling on that.
And I know we can dedicate an entire session, but can you please entertain my curiosity to really, and I'm sure many people are wondering about this too, how can we galvanize governments to implement, and it's not all about policy, but you talked about there's a bottom-up, middle-out, and a top-down approach, but the policies and regulations define a mainstream and consistent approach in decarbonization, in sufficiency thinking, name it. How do we, from France, and France being one of the leading governments that has established some sort of at least initiatives, regulatory frameworks to be able to even start doing whole life carbon assessments before anyone else has done, how do we galvanize governments to act tomorrow, literally? Why isn't this happening? Like, how do we prioritize within the political agendas that are happening and very respectful to the contextual priorities that many different countries may be facing, but maybe from your experience, because you also have been so involved in these sort of really leading initiatives and efforts.
Yes, well, in terms of life cycle assessments, other Nordic countries and etc. have been doing things also. But we are all, we are here, and what is important is happening there, okay? We know that, okay? So this is, I think it's important to keep this in mind in some way. What is important is happening in the other room here. What's really serious and important, that's what they think. That's what people think. When you look at the results of COP, people think, what happens there? But I say what is important is happening here. I say, if we don't get into showing that it is possible, showing that people do this, showing that on sectoral questions we can avoid these discussions of principles, we can avoid to be just, because principles, some people think that when you solve the big principle, okay, it runs. But that's why I say you got to get into details. Evil is in details, because you can have these major decisions and it's too late to implement them. So in some way, we have to start by implementation. So this is very much what we are trying to do with Global ABC, and what we are trying to do we are trying to push this from the level of technical things. What we're discussing here, nobody would oppose globally. Nobody, I mean, I don't know someone from a government saying, "Oh, we absolutely need to waste energy. We absolutely need to build the worst building that we can build." Nobody says that. I mean, at some point. So we need to gather all the goodwills, and this is what we're doing.
Thank you so much, Yves-Laurent. Many more conversations to continue on this one, I think, but it's great to hear your insights. I would like to turn to Emna. If I could sort of ask your views on the report that specifically we're talking about today, and I think maybe as you represent the International Union of Architects, maybe from the perspective of those that are working in the field, how do the ideas in this report can really resonate with the practical realities of architectural practice? And we can sort of summarize it as architecture, engineering, planning, name it, within the built environment sector. But of course, with your hat on, we will want to focus on architects.
Yes, thank you, Mina. It's a very relevant topic. And for us as architects, it is like many things look to be natural. And I would like to talk about revitalizing vernacular architecture as a solution for sustainable future. And the concept of sufficiency is in a way a kind of a call of to humanity's return to its roots when buildings were made based on real needs. So today, embracing sustainable solution is crucial, and vernacular architecture is at the core of this reflection, inherently offering adaptation and climate resilience. So I will talk first about sufficiency and traditional architecture. So we can see through an example of a Tunisian contemporary mosque how the traditional knowledge is inherently sustainable and can help modern practices to reduce the demand for energy, materials, and water, while supporting circular life cycles and prioritizing the human well-being. It's very important. Then I will talk about challenges to the culture-based climate solutions. Can I... sorry. Yes. So this mosque was shortlisted for the Aga Khan Award in 2020, and it is built in a modernized rammed earth, a compressed earth brick, and the mosque embodies sufficiency through 5 key themes. So first theme is about material and thermal inertia. In the Mediterranean climate, cooling is prioritized over heating. And the compressed earth bricks override thermal inertia. They absorb heat during the day and release it at night. And this reduces energy use and significantly lowers the overall resource footprint. Second theme is about natural ventilation and thermodynamics. A funnel next, please. The funnel-shaped design enhances air cooling through natural convections. And combined with passive ventilation, this reduces the need for air conditioning, supporting both climate mitigation by cutting energy use and adaptation by improving living conditions in harsh climates. Third theme is energy efficiency. This project minimizes energy consumption by reducing the need for its use rather than just lowering the energy required. Utilizing traditional local nighttime breathing technique with vaulted ventilated roofs and strategically placed dome openings enhances natural cooling, significantly cutting energy demands, especially that 80% of heat comes from the roof. Fourth theme is about recycling of construction waste. So the bricks are recycled even on site, and the minaret, for example, incorporates recycled bricks to create the red color of the design, a key part of the materials life cycle. Fifth theme is about reduction use of water. So earth bricks require less water for construction than concrete or red bricks. For instance, the today construction buildings practices commonly used in this area. It's also about indoor air quality. Earth bricks regulate humidity and improve air quality, benefiting occupant health and comfort. So despite all these benefits we can see in this material, demonstrating the sufficiency action to reduce the demand for energy, materials and water, while prioritizing the human well-being, compressed earth bricks remain underused in many countries of the global south, where earth architecture used to be once common. And this is not only due to cement lobbies, but also to significant challenges. And I would say that vernacular architecture faces cultural and contextual challenges, especially in Global South. It is at the same time the solution and the problem. I can quote, of course, issues with buildings regulations and technical standards for vernacular architecture, but there are also cultural issues. Valuing local techniques touches on cultural barriers, often overlooked in the 2030 agenda. And this is especially critical in developing countries where local culture is undermined by colonial legacies that disrupt social structures. There is also a strong desire for contemporaneity. Local populations seek a modernity that reshapes spaces, materials, and use technologies for a better quality of life. A legitimate right. And vernacular knowledge is disconnected from economic development, even associated with underdevelopment. While integrated, it can create jobs and trainings and so on. And there is also a lack of comprehension among professionals, unfortunately, about the benefits of the local materials. I can quote also skilled labor immigration. It threatens the survival of traditional know-how. And of course, the lack of finance to sustain local cultural solutions. So to overcome these challenges, we must raise understanding, not just awareness, about the value of local knowledge. Compressed earth bricks is an example that demonstrates the sufficiency of sustainable culture-based solutions, bridging the past and the future. And not only are they environmentally sustainable, but they also embody local wisdom, linking our environmental goals with cultural heritage. And that is what contemporary architecture should be about. This is why in the UIA, we emphasize the importance of culture in the built environment and call for greater representation in the post-2030 agenda framework. And through education, professional trainings, and North-South exchanges, we can preserve traditional skills and promote inclusive development and build for more sustainable, culturally enriched future for all.
Thank you so much, Emna. I think these are absolutely great insights to be shared with everyone who's listening today and those that may be watching this session later on, with particular strategies from the case studies that you shared, which I really appreciate. And you talked a lot about the traditional architecture being inherently sustainable. And I don't remember who said, but someone said that we need to, in today's time, we need to unlearn what we learned, because we actually know, the tradition, the history has the solution, the past has the solutions. We just need to be able to relearn those and then sort of apply, of course, new sort of implementation of technologies to a certain extent. That's an extreme point, but I think there is a great takeaway from that as well, because I think there is a lot of reliance on technology to save the day today as well, or the technological advancements that we see. And you also touch upon the point about capacity gap, which is something we often talk about, or have been talking about much more rigorously over the last few years across the global sector, especially with North and the Global South region, where the capacity gap is what perhaps is the predominant hindrance of progress in certain areas. Lack of understanding, lack of skills, lack of education and training around particular skill set that is needed to elevate and accelerate the perhaps application of the traditional architecture of the past in today's context where it's very applicable. And last but not least, I think this the conversation has been going great. We talked more about from a policy perspective to real sort of examples of how it can be done through architecture, how the solutions can be applied. We've seen great case studies from EMNA. And now I would like to hand over to the mic to Ilya. And first and foremost, again, Ilya, the same question to you. Could you please share your reactions and response to this report? What are the challenges or the or complements current sustainability approaches in the built environment is presenting in the context of sufficiency, but also giving your sort of joining two questions that I wanted to ask you in one. But from your I'm going to backtrack and say often in the sector we talk about examples and precedents that we can bring from the global north to global south, but we're going to spin it ahead today and we're going to say what are the examples that we can actually bring from the global south to the global north to be able to help advance all these ambitions that we're setting out. And you have great experience working in the global south over many years, so we would love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Great. Well, it's great to be here, and thank you for the questions. I appreciate being here at COP28 because exactly what you said. This exchange actually helps move the sector, and that's really quite important. So I wanted to congratulate Global ABCs, Damien and Cedric, for putting this report together. There's a lot of great information in here, and as trained architects, we are trained about economy, and economy is sufficiency, yet we need to be reminded of it, and policymakers need to be reminded of it. So as architects, we understand the report fundamentally and how we move ahead with our work. Unfortunately, in education, we're taught, well, to be the next great architect, you have to build this next great edifice, instead of understanding the built environment that we have is so valuable, right? So it makes me think about one of my colleagues, Carl Elefante, who is a past president of AIA National, and he has always said, the greenest building is the building that's already built. So if we take that ethos forward, but then go beyond, as the report begins to highlight, there's a few things that come to mind. One is that, you know, resilience and sustainability are two sides of the same coin. And you really have to then put in ecosystem services to make that coin fully deployable. If you can do that in policy, in design, in anything you do, you create equity. But what this is really getting at is this uniqueness of place. And one thing that comes directly from the Global South is that they have to rely on the uniqueness of place to advance anything. The materials that are there, the people that are there, the elements that are there are quite limited. So I'll come back to that. Because the ethos that we all need to take is that we're all in the same storm. But in the Global South, they recognize that we are not all in the same boat. We're trying to navigate the same storm, but we are using resources that we keep pulling in the Global North to navigate a storm that does not have any sort of alignment with the reality that we're facing. And that's really unfortunate, because in the Global South, they sometimes can't get the boat moving in the right direction because the resources are not there. So how do we all get in the same boat to really navigate this storm to get to the right spot? So one thing I appreciate about the report is that pointing out that the uniqueness of place and that everything that you have in your domain or control, hyper-local, and creating ecosystem services that are owned and operated and put forward by local people is rather important. Now, getting back to this idea of the response to the report. In the report, it really talks about a lot of things that have touched policy in the US. We're going massively towards electrification. That's only one small piece of this puzzle. Having served for New York State on the climate impact assessment, one really amazing thing that came forward, and to me it's groundbreaking in the US, our total climate assessment for the US did not include a sector on buildings. There was no chapter on buildings until we just produced one for the state of New York. And we worked very hard to catalog every building in the state of New York. millions upon millions of buildings, understanding their use, their square footage, their disuse, so we can advise governing bodies to say, here is the material that you have that is in disuse. How do you deploy that for a resilient, sustainable future? So what I think is really interesting about this report is it needs to go further to call for a global assessment on the built environment that really looks at material that can be redeployed in a way that takes care of the wicked problems of the world. So let's give an example. Last year alone, 2023, 114 million people displaced around the world in a single year. 114 million people. First time over 100 million people, first time over 100 million have been displaced in a single year. That is enormous. That means our buildings are failing. The built environment is failing. And the rationale that it's failing is not just because it's informal housing. It's because we are not building or retrofitting to the right place. We are not assessing where we need to live and how we need to live in a better way, right? In the Global South, they know very well where they should not be living. Do they have the capacity to not live in that place is always the question, right? So the other thing is that was a cost of $236 billion in reported losses. Now remember, there's a lot of places around the world that do not carry insurance and cannot assess their losses. So $236 billion is what we look at in the global north and say, wow, that's a lot of money, but it doesn't incorporate the total loss around the world because we cannot assess the damage to informal housing, nor the loss of livelihood, nor the loss of economy in informal structures. So we have a lot of work to do to understand what the storm is so we can collectively navigate, right? The other things coming forward is that we already know that every dollar spent in this capacity to create resilience saves $13 to every community. How does that translate to the Global South when they're not thinking about carbon whatsoever? They're thinking about, in my experience, is how do we progress every day to be successful at life and livelihood? So now, from the Global South, here I'll give you a really good example. The island of Dominica, hit by Hurricane Maria, 2017. I've been working there ever since, off and on, and the entirety of the rainforest was destroyed. The Kalinago people are the largest indigenous single group in the Caribbean, 3,500 people in one small territory, marginalized for centuries. Yet here's a group that is extraordinary in terms of how they respond to this. Although for decades encouraged to use foreign building practices, material from off-island, all of these things, any of those buildings failed during that disaster. Category 5 hurricane, devastating. Buildings that were built, and some over 100 years old, or 6 generations old, survived, and it was all wood construction from the local forest, local materials, local handiwork, local knowledge. So in the recovery effort for that, is we have a devastated rainforest, which means the material is there. We have the knowledge that needs to be, as you mentioned, it's been sort of desiccated. There's very little knowledge of how to do this joinery, how to do this work all over again. So our role in that case was to basically resuscitate the way to rebuild, to use those materials locally, to train and export the ideology of how to use hyperlocal materials, local elements, and the sufficiency of what is there to create what is a resilient, sustainable place. That entire community has now been able to create an economy and export their indigenous knowledge and marry it with modern techniques to create a holistic, resilient, sustainable future. So when I think about this report, I think it needs to go one step further. That one step further is the assessment process, and 2, really look at what the Global South can offer in terms of informing the process for the Global North. We have too many options, put it that way. In the Global South, you have too few options, so you must operate in the most narrow of margins to be successful. And the degree of success measure is life or death versus degree of discomfort. That is an extraordinary difference, and I think that this is a wonderful conversation to open that up, and I would love to discuss it much, much more. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ilya. I think I'm sort of taking some notes because there are some key remarks that you brought up. I really love the way that you describe about the uniqueness of place, is, you know, what specific Global South relies on, and I think maybe that's the comment that I have heard from someone a few years ago about, you know, we need to unlearn what we know today because we have too many options. So we are not really bringing the cleverness, perhaps, that Yves Laurent talked about before into our thinking even, because we have the options. So like, why do we need to sort of almost like work our brains harder to find a solution with a fewer alternatives? And that's a key lesson we need to bring forward from the Global South and really learn how and these were also at the fundamentals of the vernacular architecture in many places around the world, not just the global south. And maybe that's the approach and the mindset, at least, that we need to embrace moving forward. I think this is really engaging conversation, and if it's okay, I actually want, mindful of the time as well, I would like to invite Gaetan and Iman also to the stage, and thank Emna. Please, if Laurent and Ilya, please stay here, because we're going to continue this conversation of the role of architects, and we would love to hear from Iman and Gatian to share your views about. There has been a lot of conversations about the importance of embracing vernacular architecture to really align with the principles of sufficiency and draw on the indigenous wisdom to promote resiliency and sustainability in the built environment. There was a lot of emphasis on just transition and how architects can prioritize human rights and cultural preservation when especially rebuilding heritage sites or any site really affected by natural disasters that Ilya talked about with the example. And so I want to maybe see if you want to share any thoughts from this conversation, but also I want to add another question to both of you specifically, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on. How can architects really advocate for sufficiency with their clients? It's often, within the architects world, we talk a lot about design solutions, strategies. We have them. And you will hear many architects talk about the main barrier that they have is that they cannot convince their clients to do the right thing. So I really would love to bring the conversation to the client side of the equation and ask you, what is it from your perspective that architects can do for sufficiency, and to talk about from a client's perspective, from the value that the sufficiency first approach can bring to projects with architectural examples that you may want to share if you have any. And how can we in that process also avoid overbuilding, overconstruction, which was emphasized by Cedric earlier on, which is a key message of the report, while of course also ensuring there is equity and environmental responsibility in this process. So many to unpack, but please feel free to share your views, and perhaps I can start with Iman, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure, yes. Allow me to thank Global ABC at the beginning. It's a very vital topic. Resilience, sufficiency, sustainability. We always say that it's not a choice anymore, it's a must. Yves Laurent has also mentioned that it's existing and it will have to be adopted by the majority of the architects. Actually, in the UIA, allow me to share some of the activities or the projects that we highlighted during the last mandate regarding this topic. For example, we realized that both the client and the architects need more education, not academic education, but they need to be more aware of the importance of the problem. For instance, now we have 4 editions of the SDG guidebook towards the 2030 agenda. And we had this strategy of leading by example, to give examples for young architects, also the architects in different regions of the UIA. We say regions means continents, that maybe we can share experiences and learn from each other. When we say sufficiency, for example, we say that we are into the biodegradable materials, we're into having this vernacular or using the local architecture. We say also that the route to internationalizations begin with the localization. If you use everything that you have in your local community, not only the materials, you will have what it needs to be internationally recognized. So the 4th edition now is on the UIA website. You can have several examples from different part of the world, as I said. Also, we have this kind of evaluation. What do architects need? If architects know what they need, they will be able to orient the client and orient also the whole community. So we had this idea of having an atlas of SDG, where we are evaluating the implementation of SDGs in different regions, not globally. Because if we are doing this on a global scale, we won't recognize the needs of every region. So we are now asking and having multiple webinars about what can you identify the best 3 SDGs that you already have implemented in your projects, and you have successful examples from the client, from the community about. And on the other hand, 3, I won't say worse, but challenging SDGs that need to be implemented in another way maybe, or need to have more stakeholders into it, like for example changing some policies, some awareness from the community about these kind of integration. So I invite you all, I don't want to take more time, but I invite you all to have a look of our website for these two projects.
Thank you so much, Iman. And I really appreciate the fact that you talked about the evaluation process, and that's how we can discuss value, the value that we can bring to clients, because it's often value means different things to different clients and their priorities are different, cost being always at the top of the priority, but how do we discuss value from the perspective that the clients can value the most, so that the solutions and any sort of ambitions that we're putting together in a project can become a reality, because it requires clients' ownership and often investment of time and potentially cost, depending on the size and the scale of the project. Gatian, can I turn to you and ask your views on this particular topic and also any other points that you wanted to bring?
Yes, thank you. You've mentioned many things, but I will speak on one key word which you mentioned is equity. I have listened very well to each one of you. Yves Laurent, I have noted le diable est dans le détail, the devil is in the detail, and I think this is really important. Emna, about the wisdom of tradition, of vernacular. And you spoke about the client and how, by examples, a lot of things can really happen. And I wish to thank especially Ilya for bringing the global south to the question. And this is where I want to come about equity and the global south. You see, when we talking about sufficiency, we're talking of sufficiency of things that exist. But what about the things that do not exist or is a demand from the global south? I will give you just a few numbers. And I also noted the numbers of refugees and immigration, which Ilya mentioned. Africa has already a deficit of 160 million housing units. And by 2030, this will be double. This is the equivalent of the population of Germany, France, Italy, plus Spain, plus Poland. How do you deal with sufficiency to something that do not exist at all, right? And this is, I think, we really need to reevaluate our approach and cherish all the wisdom of tradition, traditional knowledge, local materials, resources, etc. And then maybe there is also some sort of solidarity that the North and the South can play. When you mention about insurance, I can add to that, in the global North, the waste that are produced by construction only equates sometimes to 30% of what materials we are using. What about if the insurance could step in there and use that waste to fuel and finance the global South demand and non-existing housing? So I really feel that we have to have this global outlook, like Ilya has been saying, and thank you for bringing that up. I was prepared to say something different, but I think what you mentioned is so relevant, and we need actually to go in this direction. Thank you.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Gati. And I think the facts that you shared are mind-boggling about Africa as an example. And there are many places around the world that will hear probably similar statistics. And I really appreciate the way that you talked about equity and the need. The essence of it is solidarity, so that we can really correctly evaluate how we bring equity to different parts around the world. Because this is going to back a point earlier that Julia even mentioned, that we cannot do a one-size-fits-all approach when we talk about equity. And it needs to be very contextual, and it needs to be exchanging. And this was something that Yves Laurent mentioned at the very beginning. We need to exchange solutions, exchange resources, whether it be waste of another sort of region to another region and so forth. I think this is wonderful. And I want to just mindful that to see if Yves Laurent wanted to bring up any other thoughts, maybe final remarks before I take the mic to the ground to see if anyone has any questions that they wanted to raise.
Yeah, well, there's so many things to say again. I'm sorry. It's well. First, I'd like to question the question of global south. I'm sorry if we are talking about things and urban matters, we cannot use this. It's too simple. It's not that. I mean, obviously, there's no, to my opinion, there's no global south. I don't know if it's the global position of France in a diplomatic approach, but I think you have countries supposedly from the global south that are part of the G20. I mean, what is the situation of Brazil compared to Egypt, compared to Sudan, compared to Côte d'Ivoire? I mean, these are very different situations, and well, you can say there are countries that have real needs that we would. There are countries that have real needs for construction. But we need to differentiate here. I think it's very important for our topic specifically. Second thing, and there's thousands of things to say about what revolution are the architects facing. I can't get into that precisely, but being a trained architect myself, I mean. This is a true revolution, and the architects, to my opinion, are not taking at the global level, are not taking this seriously enough. The revolution of uses, I mean uses. We use this term of reversibility. Does it exist in English? I don't know. I mean these questions the all functionalist approach. Because at the end of the day, a building that is meant to be an office building is going to be a housing building or a whatever. So, what does it mean in terms of conception of the building? The entire definition of inside and outside has been totally modified by this question of climate. I've been trained as a modern architect. Cherishing Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and those people who were able to give you a total continuity between inside and outside, and different status of spaces, lights, etc. This is all modified by the status of the facade, which is, I mean, the end of the end of the facade porteuse, okay, of the structural facade was a total liberation for architects at some point. It is becoming now a real thermical question. So, I mean, there's plenty of revolution, and really architects need to take this into account. We cannot continue with these like of refrigerator buildings that, you know, you only do the same building with coating. And so you end up having small I mean, it's a total revolution. You cannot face it this way. Just again, details and well, that's last thing I wanted to say is yes, also materials. I mean, the whole relationship with the value chain. If you want to reuse, and when you get to this question of insurance, if you want to reuse windows, reuse doors, reuse things. I mean, well, circularity. We are really at the beginning of the question, and insurance matters at this. Okay. Well, anyway, I don't want to be too long. There's so many things to say, and I want to. I just want to question also here the back to history. I mean, it's true that when I went to Saudi Arabia, they were talking about many things about climate, and I told them it's. I mean, in Tunisia, it's 3,000 years that, or 2,000, more than 2,000 years that people are living with 50 degrees. In the desert. So what did they do? How can we use these solutions? Nevertheless, if we want really to get to sufficiency, we will need technological solutions. We are needing technological solutions to know what is the best use of buildings, how we can go the morning, a use for the car, you know, park the car, etc. Complementarity between buildings, complementarity between heating one place and cooling the other one, and etc. We will need high tech. So, I mean, everything doesn't. It's important to make the case, and I do make the case for low technology. But it's important to make the case that low technology and historical and traditional architecture has to be assessed and has to be completed in some way by high tech. But that's all I wanted to say. It's not general remarks, but it's very unusual that we talk about architects. So I wanted to seize the opportunity to talk about the work of architects and the incredible need of architect training, and not only training in schools, but training for practicing architects. And I've been advocating for the Paris Forum to get some schools of architecture engaging in proposing short training programs for practicing architects who cannot spend a year at school to relearn. But really, this revolution has to be relearned.
Thank you so much for that point. Gatian, did you want to come in to say something?
Yeah, I think not my opinion, but I think it's you raise very important point, Yves Laurent, and being from the UIA, the International Union of Architects, I should share with you what we are actually doing in this area. First of all, we do have two specific commissions, which are international commissions. One on education, the training of architects. It's a joint commission with UNESCO that is revisiting the whole approach given of climate change, etc., for the young students of architecture. And secondly, we have a practice commission. It's an international commission with over 40 or 50 countries participating, and all of them are re-evaluating, like you mentioned, I like the word unlearn to relearn, the future. These are very important. Now, on the question of in and out, which is a very important point, you know, in the tropical climate countries, by the way, 110 countries of the world are with tropical climates, more than half. There has been a long tradition of in and out. They call it the ambiguity of internal and outdoor space. And this is totally, the best example I can give you is Costa Rica, who has actually an Institute of Tropical Architecture, has been doing that for like 25 years. And they have even now tools and sets that link technology with the principles of design in this kind of climate. The real keyword is about sustainable by design and not by materials or tangible things or technology that uses energy, etc. So there has been a lot of work, and they have established an equivalent of LEED accreditation called RESET, which they can really measure things in tropical climates. And I do like the word you have mentioned, Yves Laurent, about circularity. I think it is very important that we think not only in terms of material circularity, but also the principle which you mentioned about reversibility or reconversion or repurpose. Sometimes in the Anglo-Saxon world, you mentioned it. That is, why build if you can reconvert something that exists for a different purpose? And I think all these issues that architects are taking seriously now, and they are doing that with the global institution. I forgot to mention OECD, which is part also of our discussion with them. And we are partners with all of them. And we will be very glad to continue to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gatien and Yves Laurent, for sharing your thoughts about it. And I really appreciate that you brought up about the sort of the role of architects, the agency that architects have that often forget, but more importantly, the lack of sort of knowledge and consistent knowledge that exists amongst the practitioners of today around the world. And this is something very dear to my heart, because I often talk about that it's not just amongst architects, but also amongst built environment decision makers, policymakers, engineers, planners, designers, investors. We still to this day don't speak the same language. Even when we talk about net zero carbon, I think we still all mean different things. And I think that's why upskilling, reskilling, name it, is really critical.
Well, just on this question, we have within the buildings breakthrough a priority action that talks about standards and certifications. And this is really the question. The breakthrough, is on near zero buildings to be more adaptable. and not the concept of net zero. So we can discuss this. It's not this place. We can stay a few days here. I mean, I'm here until Thursday, so happy to discuss.
And there's a new word that is being added to our vocabulary today, which is sufficiency. So I think there's going to be many more of the conversations around how we can build the same language so that we actually deliver consistent solutions. And this is something we champion very heavily within the Climate Framework Initiative that I've been leading over the last few years. I'm mindful of the time. I want to give the floor to audiences to see if anyone has any questions before I share closing remarks with all of you. Any questions that you wanted to raise now or even later on? If you find our panelists and speakers from today, I'm sure they will be more than happy to help answer any questions you may have later on. There is someone in the back. I'm not sure how we can get a mic.
Kia ora, I'm Emily. I'm from an architecture practice in New Zealand and Australia. I did jump in late, so I may be asking a question that's already been answered, but I find awareness in the industry around both within the public and the clients' area around what architects can do in their role is really important. How do you think we could amplify awareness in the industry globally to make it more known that architects have a big role in sustainable design and a responsibility to design sustainably?
Thank you very much for that question. Does anyone from the panel want to take it? And Emna, Julia, you're also more than welcome to add to this conversation if you wanted to.
To me, there's a word in French, I can't translate it in English, it's maîtrise d'ouvrage. It's the procurement. I mean, we need to work on the procurement side, on the demand side. We are trying to set up a group of public procurement. I think public procurement should pave the way, lead the way, because at the end of the day, the architect works for someone. And if you don't train this someone, the whole value chain cannot organize. So this, to me, this is the key question. How the, comment on dit maîtrise d'ouvrage en anglais?
I think it's client's representative. Very often now in the Anglo-Saxon world, you say project manager, who is the client's representative. But I should say, I think it's very important what you say, Laurent. You know, to be an engineer, to be an architect, to be a quantity surveyor, you need to go to university, you need to be trained, etc., and then qualified. But to be a client, you don't need all that. You just become a client. And so they need to be trained so that they give us the right orders so that we do the right project.
Let me.
It is important for architects too to have a good client. There is no good project in the history of architecture without a good client. I mean, we pay tribute to Italians. Okay. There wouldn't be any qualitative public space without a proper client, someone who's able to say it's not only my building, it's also the image that I give to the city. Also city, I mean, also the question of the client relay, I mean, I can speak for hours. The city being the question of the client is key, really, and to educate the client. No, as you say, to give the responsibility to the client is key. He has this responsibility in terms of insurance, in terms of financial questions, but it's very unlikely that the client has really the skills to assume this responsibility of being a city maker.
I'm going to answer your question a little bit different way because there's so many different kinds of clients. For example, the largest client in the United States is the federal government. So the only way that you can gain the trust of the federal government is to show the body of your work is not only competent, but exceeds the expectation of the requirement. So in my opinion, you have to define who that client is. If it is a governing body, you have to understand what their needs are from the SDGs, all of their goals, and demonstrate through past work, past projects, or colleagues' work that not only can you meet that demand, you can exceed that demand. And you have to show them the ROI on the side of resilience, sustainability, and equity, but also on the dollar amount. You have to look at the timeline to say, here's the time I can deliver that project to you because we've done it in the past. It is the business of architecture that you must do that. It is nothing else. If adaptation happens at the speed of trust, that is your answer. How do you gain the trust of that client? Doesn't matter who it is. If it is, for me, working with indigenous communities in the global south, I am from a developed country and I look nothing like my clients, but to gain that trust takes a long time. But once I have that trust, you cannot lose that trust. You must follow through on every one of those pieces. So that to me is the response to your question. You must have the work completed. You must be able to demonstrate the value proposition of who you are. Organizations like the UIA, AIA, REBA must then put themselves in position to tell the world why architects are so valuable. Coming to COP for the last many years, financing for total transformation of the planet is available. It's demonstrated every year I come here. The global need for every community is demonstrated. The pinch point is in the center. There are not enough of us doing the work to actually take the goals of communities, translate them into what looks fundable to those governing bodies and insurance and banks and finance, because that is the pinch point. So again, there's the adaptation at the speed of trust. How do architects step into that pinch point, gain the trust of those communities, draw those up, demonstrate that finance can trust you to do it? So that's where I would leave it.
I'd like to add that we're in one of the perfect locations for this awareness. COP, WOOF, all these international exposure are the best because it doesn't have only the architects or the person in charge of building, but it has a multidisciplinary participants. For example, when we started the sustainability trend, if I may say so, it was more than 20 or 30 years ago. So after sustainability, we had resilience, and now we have sufficiency. So let's make it a trend. People tend to not follow a trend with the fashion only, but also with the thing that is related to their everyday life. So building is one of the trends that can accommodate sufficiency, resilience, and sustainability, but we have to lead in putting this trend on the market, on the table, in every house.
Thank you so much for everyone about your observations. I'm mindful we're at the end of our session, but I would like to conclude, maybe mention something about the impact of scalability. I think a lot of the remarks that panelists are giving here to answer to your question from the audience is in essence is about how can we scale, how can we go beyond one client, not only get a good client, but how can we go beyond that one good client's project portfolio of assets and so forth. So if I can share closing remarks, thank you so much once more for being here with us and for engaging with all of us in this conversation. Today's discussions have really underscored the urgent need to rethink how we built and how the built environment contributes to climate change, resource depletion, and inequality. Highlighted in various reports and studies that our panelists have shared. And the Global ABC's newly launched Sufficiency and the Built Environment Report really indicates the sector's outsized role. And despite progress being made in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and circular economy practices, these efforts alone cannot really address the deeper issues that we're all trying to tackle here at a very high level in our conversations and observations. There needs to be a checked growth in building floor area and resource consumption, really to understand what we're dealing with. I think data becomes critical in informing decisions of the future. And the report calls for a shift to a sufficiency revolution, if I can just iterate the points that were raised before, rethinking what and how we build to focus on meeting the human needs sustainably and reducing excess. This means prioritizing systemic approaches that address not only decarbonization, but also equity and resilience. And our panel today has brought this to life within the limited time we've been giving, exploring the role of architects in learning from vernacular wisdom, preserving heritage, and also designing responsibly to avoid overbuilding. And the key message is very clear. I think sufficiency is essential for aligning the building sector with climate and social goals, and it really informs a transformative path forward that I hope we can all embrace in our various aspects of work. So I want to thank you once more, everyone, for joining us today, and those that will be listening to this session online later. Thank you.